thank you for the kind introduction. Happy to be here. Very much appreciate coming to Tokyo and talking about this great quantum topic. I will talk a little bit about how this ecosystem is evolving. And just maybe a few remarks at the beginning. So all the figures and all the numbers you will see right now, they are basically based on many discussions we are having with research institutions, with leaders in the industry, with academia, and we try to keep track with the developments of that ecosystem. That's maybe remark number one. Remark number two is we have only limited data and only limited insights into China. We know there's a lot going on in the quantum space, but what we know so far is, I would say, a bit intransparent. We have some data points included, and at the end of the presentation, you will see a QR code which you then can take and which gives you access to the full quantum technology monitor, which we launch on a yearly basis. And the third remark is, from our perspective, this is an ecosystem in the making. Yeah? So we are all on a learning journey here, and there's a lot going on. Therefore, some of the numbers you will see are showing a big spread, yeah? Because there is some uncertainty, of course, included, depending on how it will evolve or how it might evolve. So looking into this, what we can say is it's a pretty active ecosystem. So we see, so far, we see in the range of 350 startups in that ecosystem. The money which has been raised so far is in the range of $6 to $7 billion. And the total government funding or investments announced is in the range of 34 billion. You might have seen announcements of governments like India, like Japan, yeah, but also Europe or China. China even announced $15 billion investment into that ecosystem. Europe announced in the range of 7 billion. India in the range of 2 billion. So there's a lot going on. And this is, of course, split into quantum computing, quantum communication, and quantum sensing. So whenever we talk about quantum technologies, we always look into these three areas, where quantum computing is, of course, the largest one and the most active one. We also see some we also try to monitor what is going on the scientific side. So when you look into the patents, you see that there are only in 2022, more than 1,500 patents have been filed in that space, and about 44,000 publications have been launched in that context. We also look into the talent space, yeah, because talent in the end is crucial to make that ecosystem successful. So what we see so far is there are about 50 master degrees which are very much focused on quantum tech, and about 180 universities which are currently either starting or already doing QT research. On the right-hand side of that slide, you see some figures which describe the size of the ecosystem. So the figures under the headline quantum technology market size scenarios just show you the size of the industry itself. Yeah, so which is, dependent on the scenario you take on, whether it is a base case scenario or pessimistic scenario or more optimistic scenario. The range is pretty broad. It's actually from, let's say, 10 billion to 100 billion. everything could potentially happen depending on how quickly this ecosystem will develop. So from our perspective, it probably will be in the range of 30, 40, 50 kind of billion. But we will see what is happening over the next couple of years, and then we will continuously update the figures. This ecosystem in itself will produce a potential economic value which is in the range of $1.3 trillion. And I will come to that later, how we calculate those numbers and how we anticipate the development of that ecosystem. So having said this, looking into the numbers for 2022, you can see that in QT, we basically hit all-time high with $2.35 billion in 2022 being invested into startups in that space, where of course 75% went into QC startups. So even we only have seen a growth of 1%, it's still all-time high. So looking into the number, it shows you a different kind of, let's say, split where the money is coming from. Whereas in 2021, the money came mainly from private or corporate investors, and a lower amount of money came from governmental institutions. This has a bit changed in 2022 in favor for governmental institutions. So less money came from private and corporate fundings, but more from governmental institutions. Looking into the amount of, or the number of startups which have been founded officially and publicly announced, you can see that we have seen the all-time high in 2018. There was a huge wave of new companies being founded in that ecosystem, and a lower number being founded in 2022. There are a couple of reasons why that might be the case, or why this is the case. One reason, of course, is that money is currently going more into scale-ups than into startups, which is not specific to quantum tech, but specific to all kind of tech startup environments. So the overall climate was more favorable in 2018, 2019, 2020 than it is in 2022. Yeah, so money in that ecosystem went mainly into companies which are already in the system and already active. When looking into QC, so quantum computing, you can of course ask the question, where is the most traffic in that system? And what you can see here is looking into the value chain. So we saw, or into the tech stack, we saw it even on a more granular level in the presentation before. We can say that a lot is going, or the most companies are currently in application software, but the most money is going into hardware, which is not a big surprise because hardware development in quantum computing is a quite expensive exercise. So from that perspective, most money is, of course, being requested, but also moving into this kind of area. When we look when we anticipate the evolution of that ecosystem, we might see a development which we have seen in other ecosystems as well, which basically says that the value capture is moving from equipment to hardware and then into software. So basically probably in the years 2030 and beyond, we will see definitely more value being produced in application software and services in that space compared to what is happening right now. So right now, most activities are in equipment, components, and of course hardware, which is not a surprise. We first of all need to build the basics, and then we can build software on top of it, and then later on, of course, also services. Then I looked into Japan figures, which is quite nicely depicted here. So what you can see is so far we count about 14 startups in Japan. And the interesting fact is, which is compared to the global trend, a bit different. So what we see is many companies, many startups in the application software space, less startups in the hardware space. There are probably some reasons why this is the case. Nevertheless, Japan is still number 4 behind the US, Canada, and the UK. We know that there is a lot going on in China, and probably China is also in the range of the US. The US, of course, is leading the pack by far, with the most startups being in that space. Interestingly, also the share of startup investment in Japan is also mainly floating into application software. There is less money going into hardware. I think it's very much concentrated here in Japan around especially the Riken Research Center and the research activities here in Japan, which we see later on at another slide as well. In terms of patents, we can see that Japan is doing quite well. So number 2 after China. So here we have a good insight into China. China is leading the pack by far. There is huge activity going on here. And then this is followed by Japan, the European Union, and the United States. So from that perspective, I think that's great news. That shows that there is a pretty active ecosystem in the making in Japan as well. Interestingly, there's also a focus on quantum computing, but also a focus on quantum sensing, which is also explainable because of the industrial structure of Japan, which is kind of similar to the industrial structure in Europe. And you see similarities on how the patent activity is currently being split. When it comes to research contributions and publications, we also see that Japan is still under the top 5. It's very much driven by activities in different research institutions. I mentioned the Riken Research Institute already. The announcement has been made about the quantum computer with the 64 qubits performance, and from that perspective, I think there is also confirmation that there's pretty good activity here in Japan in that respect. China also here leading the pack, followed by European Union and the United States. So what we can say here, if we compare, for example, the European Union with the United States and China, there's a lot of research activity also going on in Europe, but there is not so much, scale measured by number of startups, measured by number of scale-ups perceived and being monitored in Europe compared to the US and also compared to potentially China and also the United Kingdom. Then looking into the use cases and the value, the economic value, where does that come from? For looking into this, we need to better understand the use cases per industry and what kind of value pools might be tackled by a potential or impacted by a potential quantum computing availability. And from all the different industries we investigated, we understand that chemicals, life sciences, automotive, and also financial services are the industries which are potentially are being impacted most by quantum computing, which also means that they potentially produce the highest economic value by using quantum computing. The numbers in the financial services space are pretty high. This might change the more we understand the impact in life sciences and also in automotive and also chemicals. You can imagine, especially if you look into chemicals and also life sciences, this is mainly focused on material design and everything related to material design in those industries. And the more we understand the impact and the better we understand the impact of quantum computing here, I'm pretty sure that those numbers will increase. The numbers in financial services are pretty well understood so far. Therefore, I think the numbers are pretty stable here for financial services. Then finally, everything will only be possible if we have enough talent in that system, beside the fact that we need money, of course. And what we can see here is that we definitely have already a talent gap in this system. And you might experience this as if you are a player in this context and in this ecosystem, you might already experience this. So we looked into the job postings and the number of job postings in the last couple of years, and what we see is that the job postings are by far much higher than the number of quantum technology master degree graduates on a yearly basis. So of course, we can also use other talent with other degrees. That's not a problem, of course, if we requalify. But what it tells us is, and we have seen this in the analytics space as well, as long as we have this huge gap and this shortage of talent, the ecosystem is a little bit blocked in terms of development, and that also means in the end that talent becomes very expensive for companies desperately looking for people with those kind of skills. So it has narrowed down in 2022, but it's still pretty broad, and it needs upskilling programs also in the industry, because the universities alone will not produce enough talent in that space unless they completely will change the way they educate and they focus. In Europe, we know that there is a huge initiative being kickstarted from the European Union to look into this talent gap and to maybe change and adapt the education system to produce more talent, which is kind of feeding the demand in those deep tech and tech-related topics. Yeah, with this, I'm done with the short insight into this kind of ecosystem development. You see the QR code I mentioned in the beginning. If you go onto this website, you will see the full monitor with even more information and more data points. And yeah, thank you for listening, and hope to see you somewhere in that nice arena here on stage again. Thank you.